Hello everybody and welcome to my Frostpunk review. Frostpunk is self-described as a society survival game. You're tasked with building the last city on Earth, and you'll both need to manage the people and the infrastructure within to battle the frost. The game is developed by 11-bit studios, most famed for This War of Mine, and releases on the 24th of April 2018. Frostpunk has 3 campaign scenarios. One of the big misnomers about the game is that it's an open-ended city builder, and that's not the case. There is no sandbox mode. Instead, Frostpunk has 3 scenarios, and each scenario has a hard limit of days passed for when it ends. When starting the game, there's only one available scenario to play, a new home. This is considered the main story and probably has the most content in it of the 3. You start with nothing but a generator and 80 people to begin preparing for extreme conditions. I mean, it's already negative 20 degrees, but that, as you'll soon come to realize, is the warmest it will ever be, and it does not last long. At its core, Frostpunk is a people management game first, and a city builder second. As the governor of this town, you assign people their jobs, and enact laws that determine what rules the people can live by. People are broken down into 3 categories: workers, engineers, and children. Workers can only work on certain buildings that don't require specialized skills, like working in mines, scouting, cooking food, and hunting. Engineers are much more flexible, working most of the workers' jobs if you want, but also working in research buildings, factories, and medical facilities. As for children, it's up to you whether you want to put them to work or not. It's definitely more hands on deck, but children have a greater risk of accidents and death in the workplace. This is determined by a law you can enact, and most initial laws have 2 options that cancel their counterpart out. For instance, the child labor law can be enacted to get children working, or the child shelter law to house children during the working day. You can only choose one, and once you do, you cannot change it. Both come with ramifications, and both affect your people's hope and discontent. Hope and discontent fluctuate based on the decisions you make and the events that happen, such as sickness, homelessness, and death. If hope falls or discontent rises to the max level, you'll have about a day to correct it before you're kicked out of government and you lose the game. This is just one of a dozen or more decisions that you'll have to make in the game that greatly affect how your city behaves. Eventually, a second set of laws opens up, where you'll have to decide whether or not to take people down a path of faith and spirituality, or order and discipline. These laws have huge implications on the look and feel of your city and abilities you can do to increase hope or decrease discontent. For instance, with faith you can build shrines, churches, and temples, give evening mass and sermons to give people hope. Alternatively, you can build watchtowers, propaganda centers, and patrols to make sure discontent is kept in check. Ultimately, survival is key, and radicalizing the masses by deifying yourself might be what you need to do in order to make it to the end. It might not always be pleasant though, as patrol guards can be harassed, priests can be beaten up, as people reject the new regime that you force upon them. You can, however, always show them how faith manages and make an example of them. The moral aspects are a really engaging component of Frostpunk, especially on your first few playthroughs. Not knowing the outcomes or effects of certain laws or dilemmas gives the playthrough a really unique feel. The only drawback is that you want to play 3 or 4 or more times, you'll see the same events as they tend to appear in the same order, and you'll begin to know the outcomes. This does help you make more informed decisions, but it definitely detracts from the morality of them, because you know ahead of time what will happen. Some decisions have a little bit of randomness to them, so it's not always guaranteed, but generally speaking, I stopped reading most events because I'd already seen them by my 3rd playthrough. Your colony in Frostpunk revolves around its generator. Quite literally, the town is built around it, and that's because it radiates heat outwards in all directions. Because of this, the building system is then layered in a radial grid around the generator, and for each layer outwards, you lose a level of heat. This is actually an extremely interesting and fun way to build that gets much more complex as you need to build further and further out as your colony grows. Buildings also have base insulation levels, so better insulated buildings can be built further out. Then there's buildings that have odd shapes and interrupt the layers behind them, and buildings that require a certain level of heat to function. It might seem simple, but these rules actually generate a lot of interesting gameplay and create fun problems to solve about how you keep everything warm to minimize the amount of people getting sick. You're also trying to minimize the amount of external heaters you need, as that'll burn through your coal reserves. Every heat level is equivalent to about 10 degrees, so when the temperature drops periodically, every few days or so, you have to make sure that you've built your city with low temperatures in mind. Creating a hothouse that grows food on the extremities of your city will most likely cease functioning if the temperatures drop and it's not in range of the generator. This adds another layer of depth to the city planning. While you do get back the majority of resources when you dismantle and relocate a building, generally speaking you want to anticipate the rise and fall of temperatures and balance your heating technologies to keep your buildings operational. Often the system means that you'll have to uproot some houses and push them further out, as the needs of the city is greater than the individual. These in themselves are tough choices because you know that pushing a house further out will probably create more sick people if you can't give them the heat coverage they need. Then you have to make sure you have enough medical facilities and staff to cope with that demand. When you get a sudden influx of 50 people, that can really shake up your structure, but good city planning rewards you with plentiful resources and minimal sick, allowing you to cope with refugees. It really is an excellent and interesting balance between heating, technology, special buildings, and the demand of the city. The economy of Frostpunk relies on gathering resources by hand to enable you to start researching new equipment and gear so that you can then set up mines, sawmills, and steelworks next to designated resources. The interesting thing here is that the resources are usually on the edges of your city, and workers will get cold if you don't set up external and workplace heaters. So as you scale up for your new resources, you'll also have to manage your coal burn rate. Steam hubs and workplace heaters can be set to turn off after work hours, so that you're conserving a little bit of coal in places where there are no people at certain times. I've found that turning off or turning down the generator's heat during the day is pretty good too, because people are all out at work, so you don't need to heat their houses. With only coal, wood, and steel to really worry about, you'd assume it's pretty easy to find the balance you need with buildings. But with random influxes of new people, different technologies, and different laws, the amounts will vary in your playthroughs of how much you need. And then of course you need to stockpile for the future as the temperature creeps lower and lower as time goes on. Those are just the building materials though. You also have raw food and food rations to think about. By creating hothouses or hunting lodges, you'll gain set amounts of raw food that will need to be cooked and converted into food rations. One raw food is equal to 2 food rations, so you want to make sure that you convert it if you can, as it's obviously inefficient to feed starving people with raw food, plus it probably doesn't do them any good. As you scale up, you should start gaining enough resources that you can start stockpiling them for the future. Special depots need to be created and assigned for resource storage and allow you to customize what you want to focus on to an extent. The reason you'd need to stockpile is because when a worker falls sick, they stop working if they're being treated. This means their efficiency of the workplace goes down. If you don't plan accordingly, a drop in 20 degrees can mean a lot of people get sick quickly, or some buildings stop functioning altogether, and these are the times when your city is put to the test, and a good economy will prevail when your workers need a break. In my first playthrough, I learnt this the hard way when I had a sudden cold snap hit, and over the course of a few days, half of my entire population fell sick. What's worse is that the gravely ill, depending on how you choose to treat them, might never return to work or become amputees, so even though the city survived the cold snap, a lot of people were crippled by it and my economy went into shock, not being able to provide as much coal as we were used to, and slowly burning our reserves out. So I mentioned that you get influxes of new people over time, and that's due to scouting. As the game takes place over the course of around 50 days or so, people aren't necessarily being born in that time, and so to grow your colony, you need to go looking for people and for resources to help your economy. Once you've built a beacon, you can then view the world map and see locations of interest. These are probably my favorite thing in the game. You send scouts out to these locations and are usually met with some sort of dilemma. These dilemmas lead to more areas of interest, some that have people, some that have resources, or some that have nothing at all. Even out in the world map, the choices are tough, as scouts are finite in numbers, and it can take a long time to travel between these locations. Finding resources out in the map is no good if you don't bring them back, so you're often faced with the tough choice of pushing onward to find more stuff, or to be happy with what you have and come back. There's also a unique resource to be found out in the world called steam cores. These are used to power big machines like coal mines, hothouses, or factories, which can then be used to create automatons, which are kind of autonomous robotic machines that work resources 24 hours a day. Because of the value placed on steam cores and the fact that you can only find them externally, it can be very risky to continue scouting while your party carries them. I won't spoil it, but I entered a location and rolled the dice, losing 200 steel, 200 wood, and 4 steam cores, and 5 scouts in the party. It was truly devastating. After that, I brought every steam core I could home. Another aspect to exploration is outposts. Building an outpost works kind of like a beacon. It allows you to create an outpost team and then go to a location rich in resources and carry it back. An abandoned coal mine can see you earning 800 coal per day if you set up an outpost there, for example. There's an outpost for every resource, but you have to first find them with a scouting party and then set up a team of outpost people to retrieve the resources. Outposts are finite as well, so you won't be able to gather everything and bring it back. Instead, you'll just have to choose what you need the most. So what is all this work and preparation building to? I mean, your task is survival, but when does it end? During the main story, you'll encounter refugees fleeing from a great storm. If you research it, you can figure out when it's going to hit and what you need to survive it. The Great Frost, as it's known, is what you've been preparing for. It's a giant ice storm that sweeps across the map, destroying scouting locations and causing your people to panic. It's the ultimate survival test, and when it hits, you need to prepare for temperatures that will drop to -80, -100, and -120 degrees, and even lower right before the end. Your people will be pushed to their limits as fear grips them, they riot and they steal supplies, and they refuse to work, wanting to spend their final days with their family. Depending how well you've built, how much you've stockpiled, and how many people you will have, that'll determine if you'll survive or not. It really is an intense time in the game. As your city begins freezing over, your resources stop working, and machines start breaking down. For the scouts, you'll need to decide what locations you think you can hit, whilst avoiding the storm and getting back safely. The Great Frost is the endgame. It lasts about a week, and afterwards it's game over. You'll get a summary of your city and reflect on how you did, and then be booted back to the main menu. For me personally, this was a tad underwhelming. The storm itself was exciting and difficult, but the ending cutscene I didn't really feel like reflected my decisions too well, and it didn't really give me a decent rating for wanting to go back and try better. I was told how many people I saved, and that's all I had to go by. It didn't tell me how many people died under my rule, how many people I never met, or tell me how my people felt about me as a ruler. I feel like a rating scale of 1 to 20 with cool names like you were a savior or a tyrant or a prophet would encourage me and players alike to want to do better. Better yet, an online integration that tells me how many players made my choices, similar to the Telltale franchise, would also add a cool moral aspect to the game. How many people made children work or buried their dead? Something that gives meaning to the endgame I think personally was just a bit lacking, and while a short time lapse and asking me was it worth it does make me reflect, I don't know if it was worth it if I don't know how my people felt about it. They survived, so I guess it was. Once you've reached 20 days in the main campaign, the other two scenarios are available to play. The Arcs is a scenario about preserving seeds in Arc buildings. These are buildings that need to be kept warm all the time, and only around 40 engineers look after them, so unlike the main mode, you'll have to build and think a bit differently, mostly using automatons to keep the city alive and warm. The Refugees is the third scenario, and in many ways it's the opposite of the Arcs. In the Refugees, you'll encounter wave after wave of fleeing refugees, bloating your city very early, and you'll have to cope with the incredible demand placed on it. Then the wealthy lords of London will come looking to live amongst you after you essentially stole their generator, and this causes a lot of strife and class divide. The cool thing about both scenarios is that they offer their own unique world maps, with unique locations and dilemmas. They also follow their own stories, and so the storm isn't always the endgame. They have different criteria and issues that you have to solve. They also both have their own unique layout, meaning that you get more interesting building situations. So the extra scenarios are definitely a welcome addition to Frostpunk. However, I feel like you'll probably play each one maybe twice before you're done with it. I mean, you can always crank up the difficulty and try your best, but again, I'm not too sure what the motivation for doing that is. Before wrapping up the review, it has to be mentioned that this game has absolutely immaculate art direction and art quality, especially for a small studio. The portraits of all the dilemmas and events and locations are all unique and extremely high quality, layered in a sort of motion comic style, and every message, notification and event explodes with a bassy thud and ink blotch to reveal the content within. It's just a very satisfying way to find places and read messages. The look and feel of the city is just perfect, with smoke billowing out against the icy backdrop. As you upgrade buildings and your generator, they actually change and look different, with the generator's final form an almost living mechanical machine with pistons pushing and pulling flames around, And speaking of living mechanical machines, the automatons are just the darling of this game. They walk the streets around your city, looking to refuel its steam hubs, and then have unique animations for all the different buildings that they can work on, planting themselves on the sides like mobile engines docking into an empty chassis. The audio design as well complements everything you see on screen, from conversations on the streets to the creaking and cracking of your screen as the temperature drops. It really feels cold when things start getting bad. The UI is really modern and clean, but yet still fits in with the steampunk setting, and can convey a lot of information as well, with a really cool looking thermal overlay mode, allowing you to see the conditions in all buildings at a glance. I did however find that it was a little bit hard to distinguish buildings, especially as your city grew, so I would have loved to see some other coloured overlays for where my population was working, and for the different building types. There are methods of finding that stuff, but it can look a little crowded at times. Lastly, I need to give a shout out to the music, especially during the storm. I cannot express how fitting it is, so I'll just let you listen for a few seconds. Frostpunk is all about strategic city planning in extreme conditions, and managing people through difficult decisions. It is an excellent experience, but it undermines its own focus on morality when it presents the same situations multiple times. By presenting you with the same decisions in a linear order, with very little randomization to the outcome, you do lose connection to the stories that you forged the first time you played. That being said, the experiences I did have with my cities held a lot of weight, and made me think about what would actually happen in these circumstances. The game is great, and it's borderline excellent. It's a must play in my books. 11-bit studios have exceptional quality and talent, and I hope they continue to support Frostpunk with fresh content, as it's the first time experience that always has the biggest impact. That's going to be it for my review of Frostpunk. Please let me know what you think of the game in the comments below, and let me know what you think of the review and the score. You can also vote on a poll in the video cards to see how others feel about the score, which is kind of fun. And if you like the video, don't forget to give it a like, as it really helps the channel out, and consider sharing the video with friends or around the web, as it can have a huge impact. Thank you as well to all my supporters on Patreon and on Twitch. That's all for me. My name is Darren, and I'll see you in the next one.